Hey friends, welcome to or welcome back to another episode of Cold-Blooded Serial. I am your host and true crime bestie, Tika. Okay, where we last left off, Richard Chase confessed to his dad that he has been eating rabbits. And his dad just shrugged it off like, oh, okay, son, that's normal. Now it's the following day, and Richard's dad decides to pay him another visit. But when he arrives to his son's apartment, the door is wide open, and an overwhelming stench hits his dad. Now, his dad knows that his son always smells really bad, but he said that this smell was a lot worse than the previous smells. So he enters the apartment and he said that it smelled like a combination of blood and vomit. That's absolutely disgusting. So once he's inside, he sees his son sitting in his own vomit in the living room. Richard tells his dad that he has food poisoning from a bad rabbit that he ate. And of course, now the dad's like, oh my God, like we need to rush you to the hospital because son, you just look worse than you usually do. Once they arrive to the hospital and the doctors run tests on Richard, they find that Richard actually did not eat a bad rabbit. He was in septic shock. So the dad's like, Richard, what happened? Because you keep telling us that you ate a bad rabbit. Like, what happened? Finally, Richard confessed that he didn't just eat the rabbit or drink the rabbit's blood. He has actually been injecting himself with the blood. Why, you ask? Because he believed his own supply of blood was critically low and his blood pressure had been brought down to 0 because his blood is turning into dust. Friends, he sounds insane. And honestly, as soon as he said that, the doctor should have been like, we need to have him committed because your son is in serious need of some psychological help. So Richard tells them that the only reason he has been injecting himself was to replenish the blood that's low in his system with the animal's blood. After hearing this, the doctor did run some tests on him and confirmed that Richard Chase was dealing with paranoid schizophrenia, and he has also been suffering from somatic delusions. The doctor wanted to hold him for 14 days minimum. I think that the dad agreed to it. I don't have the exact dates of when he was committed into or when he was brought to the hospital from his septic shock. But I do know that on April 28th, 1976, he was officially admitted into the psychiatric ward. So this doctor is at least trying. The doctor at the psychiatric ward felt that Richard needed more intensive care than he was able to provide. On May 19th, he transferred him to another hospital, despite the fact that Richard is in full denial that he has a mental illness. Of course, the doctors are going to communicate amongst themselves, right? Based on the confessions of Richard and the test that the original doctor ran. This doctor is like, no, like, young man, you're staying here, okay? So, Richard stays. And he slowly begins socializing with other patients and playing basketball. His medication is helping him to be less paranoid and less hostile. Now the doctor's main concern was his continuous talk about blood. Richard enjoyed drinking the blood and eating raw animals. So they're like, he's made some progress, but we need to figure out how to get him to realize that there's nothing wrong with his blood and that eating and drinking the blood of living animals is a problem. Richard talked about it so much that the other patients began to nickname him Dracula. The doctors really need to figure out how to help him. But I understand this is the 70s. They didn't have all of the tools and knowledge that we have today. So this is, they were probably like, what in the world is going on with this guy? Like, I've never seen this before. Let's do research. And, research for them was reading a million books, probably making phone calls to other psychiatrists to see how they can help this patient. Everything's going good there. Everything except for him talking about the blood. But just like before, as soon as things start to get good, there's something inside of Richard that snaps and is like, no, this is not our reality. Like, we need to wake up and show people who we really are. Richard does that. And now the nurses are starting to become afraid of him because they begin finding headless birds in his trash can. And one time, a nurse even caught Richard with the corpses of 2 headless small birds on his floor, and blood was dripping from his mouth. That's a scary scene. He probably needs to be in like a padded room. And I'm not trying to be a jerk or be funny, but seriously, you're out here just ripping heads off of birds and drinking it. And when you get caught, you're not even acting like what you're doing is wrong. After the nurse reports it, the doctors realize that the antipsychotic medication that they put him on was ineffective. And of course, the very worst of his symptoms, which is the whole blood and killing of the animals, had not improved. He's gotten so bad that everyone, patients included, have become afraid of him, and 2 nurses that were working with him quit because he is scary. We're going to fast forward to September 29th, 1976. This is 4 months after he was admitted to this new psychiatric hospital. Richard is still 26 years old, and the doctor appoints his parents as conservators, which is his legal guardian, as he's an adult with a disability. Richard's parents were given the authority to decide where he would live, and they would manage any relationships that he had, whether it was platonic or intimate, and manage his finances. It's been 4 months. Why is he being released? In the last episode, friends, I told you guys that lots of doctors were going to let him down. We're going to fail him. And I still don't understand why. I don't understand why they just didn't try to just keep him there. Like, even if you don't understand how to fix him, you know that he doesn't belong in society. So just keep him there because he hasn't committed a crime against a human yet. So he can't be locked up in prison, but it's obvious that his mental status is not all there. So he should definitely be in a place that's going to keep him safe as well as everyone else. On that same day, he was discharged despite the pleas of the hospital staff who witnessed Richard being Richard and feared for the lives of anyone who should come in contact with him. I don't understand why the doctors still thought this was a good idea. If your staff is begging you to keep him there because they're the ones who work closely with him, they're the ones who sees how unstable he is, they're the ones who sees him biting the heads of birds and drinking the blood, they're the ones that you should be listening to and being like, you know what, maybe there's another patient here who is less violent. But that's my opinion. The doctors obviously didn't listen to me. Not like I was alive then, but the doctors didn't listen to the staff. And we know that later on he becomes a serial killing psychopath. Let's continue. So now we're going to fast forward a year to 1977. Richard Sr. and Beatrice are like, son, you have been doing so great this year. I don't think we need to renew our conservatorship. What? Just 1 year? Like, he's shown at this point for at least like 15 years he's shown that he has not been mentally stable. And you just think after 1 year of him being somewhat normal, that this is enough for you to just give up parenting. And at 27 years old, his parents decided to wean him off of his medication because it's been keeping him lethargic and zombie-like. I know that the doctors released him to you, but did they give you permission to wean him off of his medication? Because I think that the medication actually has been helping him to not give into his crazy, evil acts that he has been holding in. Not his acts, but like his fantasies, his dark, delusional, evil fantasies. But his parents were like, you know what? No, Richard's been doing good. We're going to do this. And friends, by the following summer, he was back on drugs. And you already know the combination of weed and LSD has made him extremely paranoid. But, you know, they just figured that Richard had it under control. So the following summer, 28 years old, he's back on drugs. He's back living in his mother's house and once again torturing the same German Shepherd that he almost killed years ago. This poor dog, 4 years later, he ended up torturing the German Shepherd to death. As the days passed, his parents realized, oh, we made a serious mistake. But friends, do you want to know what was their wake-up call? What made them realize the grave mistake that they made? One night, Richard's mom, Beatrice, hears like a scuffle on her front porch. And she's like, I don't know what that sound is, but it's really annoying me. Maybe it's some cats, maybe it's some dogs. I don't know. Let me go check it out. And when she goes to her front door, she hears a sound that sounds like her son. She opens the door and her son is on her porch, covered in blood. In one hand, he held a rifle. In the other hand, a cat. And she looked in horror to see that the poor cat's brain had been splattered all over her front porch. And she watched in slow motion as her son dropped to his knees, used his fingernails to rip the cat open, and began to eat the insides of the cat and drink the cat's blood. What? Like, what? I'm assuming that she watched this whole thing happen because she was probably just frozen in fear. Because I can't imagine seeing that scene. Like, it sounds like something worse than what plays in a horror movie. Like, I'm gonna blame her because 1, you gave him his freedom. 2, you took him off his meds. His meds has been the thing that's been having this whole blood vampire type situation under control. But you have now released the demon within him and he's just doing what he wants to do. Personally, I would probably close the door gently because I wouldn't want to distract him. Lock all the locks, call 911 and be like, hey, there's a psychopath on my porch eating a cat and I fear for my life. So now it's the following month, October 1977. And Richard, who no longer lives at home, he's living on his own, he contacted the SPCA and purchased a dog for $15.99. That's right, friends. The cost of living was so low that a dog for sale was only $16. 10 days later, he goes back and he buys a second dog. But then he's like, you know what? The SPCA is probably going to start catching on and realizing that something's wrong with me. I'm not going to buy any more dogs from them. After that, he buys a puppy from a woman for $25. She said that the dogs in her care immediately cowered at him. And of course, she didn't think anything of it because he appeared normal. So, that's 3 dogs in about a month. In mid-November, he buys 2 Labrador puppies from a neighbor. And then he began stealing dogs, including a Saint Bernard. How do you even try to kidnap a Saint Bernard? Because those dogs are huge. In the book, they didn't say that it was a puppy. They said it was a Saint Bernard. So I'm assuming it was the full-size dog. Luckily, he was caught and never returned. So you're probably wondering if he's actually killing all of these animals at home, right? And friends, that's exactly what he's doing. He buys these animals, brings them home, kills them, and then he hangs them in order to drain all of their blood, where he drinks it, eats their flesh and their organs. And then, of course, if it's too much, he just makes it into a warm, bloody smoothie. We're going to fast forward now to a month later. Now it's Christmas. His parents buys him gifts. But Richard's like, Mom, what I want most is to come to your house for Christmas dinner. She's like, boy, are you crazy? You think I'm going to let you in my house? I never forgot about how you beat me with the phone. I saw you kill a cat, rip it open with your bare hands, and eat it. You killed my poor dog, my poor German Shepherd. No, you are to never set foot in my home again. Obviously, that's not what she said, but I'm pretty sure it was something like that. So, she told him no, because both her and his sister Pam were scared of him. They loved him, but they didn't trust him and they didn't want him around. Later, Richard blames this rejection for the reason that he snaps shortly after Christmas. So, the next day, December 26, he buys a lot of bullets and he decides that today is the day that he stops killing animals and he upgrades to humans. He waits a few days and on December 29th, he decides to take a drive down a street and he watches as a family unloads bags from their vehicle. He watches the mom and the sons walk into the house. And when the father is alone, bent over in his trunk, grabbing the last of the grocery bags, Richard shoots 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin in the back and pulls off. The police were confused because there was no reason that this man should have been involved in a drive-by shooting. A possible lead came to them when Bob, the younger of Ambrose Griffin's sons, called the police to report a suspicious man that his brother Rick had seen carrying a rifle near their home. The brothers followed Richard and called the cops to let them know where the three of them were. Richard didn't have the murder weapon on him and he told the police that he was at work. Richard couldn't be their suspect. The police were feeling defeated. All of their leads so far had been bogus until a 12-year-old boy and his mom came in. The boy said that he saw a brown Pontiac Trans Am drive by, which was his favorite car. Therefore, it caught his attention. He said as the car drove by, he saw the driver lift his gun, point it at him, and fire. Luckily for the 12-year-old boy, the driver missed. Friends, if Richard would have succeeded, that would have been his second murder in one day. So, the child was shaken up, but got a good look at the driver. He told the police that it was a man in his 20s with brown hair. The police asked his mom if she'd be okay with them having their hypnotist come in to see if they can get more information from him. She agreed. And a few days later, they met with Dr. Leroy Walter, who had a PhD in hypnosis. And before the session was over, the boy was able to provide them with a license plate number. But unfortunately, the plate numbers didn't pull up anything in the DMV, and there wasn't a brown Trans Am registered in their city. Now, we're going to fast forward to January 9th, 1978. The police received a report that was filed on December 27th, 1977. So a year later, they're just now finding out about this police report that was filed around the time that he just started shooting people. So, 2 days before Mr. Ambrose Griffin was shot in the back, Dorothy Polensky lived a couple blocks away from Ambrose and said that she was washing dishes around 6:30 in the evening. She heard a sharp noise and the kitchen window shattered. She felt something hot and fast whiz past her head. She begins patting her hair and head, and she's fine. Oh my gosh, that's so scary. What a psycho. Like, what is he doing? He's just going on a shooting spree, on a murder spree? Like, it makes no sense. At least now it's helping the police to kind of put some pieces together, right? So, after reading this report, the two detectives decide to pay Miss Dorothy Polensky a visit. They ask to check her kitchen, and it's been about a year. She's probably like, there's nothing here. I've checked. I'm not even sure if it was actually a bullet because I never found anything. But if you want to check, check. They search her kitchen for about 39 minutes before they find a single bullet embedded into the wood of a cabinet, hidden behind her cups and dishes. They bag it up, give it to the crime lab for testing, and lo and behold, the bullet came from the same gun that was used to kill Ambrose Griffin. Friends, they're getting closer. So, the police realized that this killer was truly a lunatic and just killing people at random. There was no lead, unfortunately, to tell them who would be next, which makes this even scarier because this psychopath just decides because he wants to practice killing people, he's gonna kill you. After this, Richard begins buying newspapers and circling his crimes among other crimes that intrigued him. He took a break from killing, but decided he would pick up arson. Prior to setting someone's home on fire, he always ensured that no one was home first. Then, once he got bored with the arsons, he starts breaking into people's homes because he enjoyed the feeling of making others feel helpless and scared. He is psychotic. Before noon on the morning of January 23rd, 1978, Richard Chase had gone hiking with his dad and attempted to break into one woman's home, but saw that she was in there, so he couldn't. Like, friends, he's really spiraling out of control now. So on this same day, January 23rd, 1978, still before noon, he makes his way to 2360 Tioga Way. And through the window, he notices a pretty young lady alone. He pulls out his .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun. He puts a bullet in the mailbox. He walks to the front door, and unlucky for her, it was unlocked. And later on, he tells the courts, or tells the police, that if a door was unlocked and he was able to walk in, it meant that he was welcomed. So, as the 22-year-old Teresa Whalen walked to her front door to take out the garbage, she was immediately stunned when the front door swung open and a disheveled man stood in front of her with a gun held out. Teresa drops the bags as the first bullet shot through the palm of her right hand, tore through her forearm, and exploded, hitting her in the head. The second bullet tore through her cheek and broke her jawbone. She falls to the floor, and the deranged Richard Chase walks over to her and fires his final shot, shooting her in the head. He grabs her lifeless body, drags her into a bedroom with a spoon and an empty yogurt container. So you're probably like, well, where's her husband? Well, while this was happening, Teresa's husband, David, who was a truck driver, was miles away with a truck that happened to break down multiple times in one day. What are the chances that on this specific day, your truck prevents you from coming home to your wife? Like, I'm not necessarily saying that he would have been there before David killed his wife or even on time to save her. It's just weird to me that on this specific day, his truck broke down like 2 or 3 times in one day. So hours after her attack, David Whalen finally arrives home, and he immediately feels as if something was wrong. The first clue was because the house was dark, but the radio was still playing. David makes his way through the house, and he follows the dark oil spots that led to his bedroom. Once he gets to his bedroom, he witnesses his beautiful 22-year-old wife naked on their bed with her intestines resting on top of her chest. He let out a wail that was so full of grief. He called his dad and his brother, for comfort, like for them to just be there with him. And then he runs to a neighbor's house yelling, "My wife is dead." It was the neighbor who called 911. The detectives learned that the murderer did this horrific act for their own sick pleasure. Even the most experienced detective among them had difficulty keeping their composure. The CSI team took pictures and found a pencil on the floor, a book of matches, a blood-stained yogurt cup, and something they couldn't quite make sense of. There was blood all around the body, but no fingerprints, which indicated that the killer wore gloves and cleaned up after himself. The investigation continued all night into the early morning, and the cops still had no real lead of who the deranged killer was. While the police searched for their killer, Richard sat at home watching the news for updates on his 2 murders, and he also began exploring different neighborhoods for his next victim or victims. The day after Teresa Whalen's murder, January 24th, 1978, detectives interviewed Daniel Owens and his wife, who sold Richard a pair of Labrador puppies a few months earlier. The couple told the detectives that the day after Richard bought the puppies, they noticed that one puppy they kept was dead. The poor puppy had been shot in the head, and its belly was ripped open. Its organs, including the kidneys, were pulled out of its body, and Richard later confessed that he drank some of the blood. The vet found fragments of a .22 caliber bullet embedded in the dead puppy's flesh. And friends, this is where I leave you. Yes, with this craziness. I know, I'm sorry, we're almost done. This is the second episode of 3. Stay tuned and I will quickly record my next episode and get it out to you guys. That way we can see how crazy Richard Chase can actually be, because it gets crazier. And then we can also see how and when he gets caught. Please stay safe and I will talk to you soon. Bye.